Good morning once again, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for being patient to wait for our presentation that is coming last. This is a presentation that shall be done in style with my colleague Emma from Green Cape. I shall introduce myself for who I am and where I come from, and I will let him take over, introduce himself and go through a couple of slides, and then I will join him a bit later. Is that agreeable? Thank you very much. So my name is Henry once again. I'm from the National Cleaner Production Center of South Africa. And as you definitely well know that we are a program of the DTI and we are hosted by the CSIR. And our major reason for existence is helping South African industries to improve competitiveness through to reduce environmental footprint through implementation of resource efficiency and cleaner production. And in cleaner production, as a methodology, we have a plethora of programs. One of them is industrial symbiosis. So this shall be all about what industrial symbiosis has done to present, to promote and uplift and move forward the applications of resource efficiency and cleaner production. Over to Emmanuel.
Thanks, Henry. Good morning, everyone. My name is Emmanuel Kasese. I work for Green Cape. I'm the program manager for the Western Cape Industrial Symbiosis Program. Just to give you a bit of context of what Green Cape does, we are an NPO that was set up by the Western Cape government in 2010 to drive the green economy within the Western Cape and in South Africa in general. We mostly work in three thematic areas. That's energy, water, and waste. In energy, we look at energy efficiency. We look at how we can work to increase the uptake of more renewable energy sources within manufacturing. In water, we look at more sustainable use of water. That's looking at recovery, recycling and reuse of water. We also look at waste, looking at value-add activities that can be done to waste to beneficiate it. Okay. So there's been quite a lot of talk about industrial symbiosis, circular economy. For me, as a practitioner of industrial symbiosis, the two are synonymous with each other. You cannot mention one without talking about the other. So when you look at it, if we just to break it down, I always like to find creative ways of explaining what industrial symbiosis is. If we go back to high school to our biology, most of us learned about symbiosis and parasites. I think we're all familiar with parasites. Parasitic relationships are relationships where you have one party benefiting to the detriment of the other. And that's opposite of that is what you call symbiotic relationships, where you have symbiotes, where two organisms work to the mutual benefit of both parties. So if if symbiosis is something that occurs naturally in nature, that's why we always talk of wasteless ecosystems. And what we're talking about there is we're not saying the individual organisms within the ecosystem are not generating waste. We're just saying when you look at the total, because what's generated as waste by one entity is taken by the other as a resource, in the end you end up with a wasteless sort of economy where there's no waste that you can see. So if you take the same concept, you apply it to industry, you come up with what's called industrial symbiosis. What's essentially happening there is industrial symbiosis identifies what are called underutilized materials that companies have or businesses have. So you identify those, then you try to match them to other companies that can use them. And when you say underutilized resources, we're talking, usually it comes in the form of waste materials and byproducts that companies are generating. So one company's waste ends up being another company's resource. Okay, we always talk about the old ways of doing things and the new ways of doing things. So traditionally, businesses have always implemented what's called a linear production model. And we found that these models are not sustainable anymore due to resource constraints. We can talk of resource depletion. We can talk of materials that have a negative impact on the environment. So what we're trying to do, what businesses are trying to find ways of moving away from what's called a linear production model to what's called a more circular economy production model. Just to explain what a linear production model is, for most companies or most businesses, this is how they used to do things. If you look at the point here. Okay, anyway, so it always starts with the primary sector where you're extracting your resources. That's your feed material, your raw material. It goes through some production process. From there, distribution, there's consumption, and then the last phase of it is always disposal. So at every step of this value chain, there's always waste that's being generated. It always ends up as being waste that goes to landfill. So if you start to think about, if you can imagine a scenario where if you look at the downstream end where you have your waste disposal, if you can find ways of reintegrating material back into the economy, right, so you can actually reuse it in some of your processes, you start disposing less of material. And what actually starts to happen is that when you go to the back end, which is where you're starting your primary sector, you start relying less on resource extraction. And what actually starts happening there is that you now transition from a linear economy to what's called a more circular economy, which is the diagram below. And with what's called a circular economy, what happens is the more you become less reliant on resource extraction and you're disposing less, you start to create new industries like the recycling, recovery sectors, recycling sectors, which are actually growth sectors with quite a high lot of employment opportunity. Okay, and just to give you an example of how industrial symbiosis works. So you can imagine a company A, right, that's still practicing what we call the linear production model, where they have inputs and outputs. You have materials coming in, they get processed into some product goes to market, and the byproducts and the and the waste, which also form part of the outputs, either go to disposal, and for some people, they can recycle some of the stuff back into their processes, right? And then you have another company B, business as usual, you have inputs coming in, outputs going out. Another company C, still business as usual, does the same thing. Now you can just imagine a scenario now where the outputs, which are usually the byproducts and the waste streams coming from company A, can be used by company B as a resource. And the same applies to the stuff that's coming out of B as waste, can be used by A as a resource. Stuff coming out of C can be used by B as a resource as well. This is a more idealized industrial symbiosis concept. This is actually how it actually works. It might not be like this in real life, but ideally this is what you want it to look like. So when we talk of materials, when you talk of industrial symbiosis, I spoke about underutilized resources. We're not just talking about the tangible physical materials that you can touch, like your wood, plastics, minerals and stuff. There are also quite a number of other things that are also factored into materials. For example, we can talk of expertise. That's stuff that's intangible, that's stuff that you can't touch. For example, a good example would be, for example, if you have a welder on your site and the welder only works, it's not fully utilized. They only maybe weld once a week, and for the rest of the 4 days they're just sitting. But your neighbor also needs a welder, and you can share that resource. We talk of stuff like capacity, where, for example, maybe you have a shredder that you use maybe twice a week. For the rest of the time you're not using it, but somebody else within your local, co-located within your vicinity, also needs a shredder, and they have to buy a new shredder instead of just sharing that with you. We also talk of logistics. A good example there would be what we call reverse logistics. For example, where you have a company sending material to point B, right? And so you send a food truck fully loaded to point B, and it comes back empty. And your neighbor is doing the opposite. They are sending a truck that is empty to point B and to collect stuff and bring it back to you. So you can start actually optimizing your logistics around there and start sharing that resource of transport. We also look at water and energy, look at wastewater, how it can be recovered, how it can be reused. We look at fit for purpose, where we're saying low quality water coming from processes. We can find uses for it. For example, if you have the processes that don't require very high quality water, for example, like brick making. So you have low quality water coming out of a process, and then a brick maker takes it to make his bricks. We also look at recovery of waste energy. We're looking at recovery of waste energy for stuff like heating and other uses. And the question is always, why do we try and implement industrial symbiosis? The answer is simple. So when we started, it was more around some of the stresses and shocks that the municipalities were facing. So we're looking at stuff like job creation, landfill space running out. So the moment you start implementing industrial symbiosis, because now you're diverting stuff from going to landfill. You're prolonging the life of your landfills, which are very costly to build. And then for businesses that are actually implementing IS is industrial symbiosis, you find if you're able to separate some of your materials, your waste materials, adding value to it, you can actually be able to sell some of it. That's additional revenue, which adds to your bottom line. Cost reduction, for example, if you're not sending stuff to landfill, that means you're not paying disposal costs. You're not paying transport costs to take the stuff to landfill. If you start using alternative substitute raw materials, which are cheaper than virgin raw materials, you also start reducing your costs. So it actually helps you in a way meet your triple bottom line. We also look at job creation opportunities that come up. Is you start, because whenever you are doing value add activity, that is actually something new that you're doing. For example, if you just have someone at your company that you just employ just to separate the stuff at source, that is already job creation. We also look at investment opportunities where now new enterprise are actually set up and money is actually pumped into these projects. So in SA context, just to tell you some of the stuff that we do as IS practitioners, our job mostly is to try and establish a symbiotic network of companies within the country. So the more companies that you have within a network, the higher the chance of the companies getting to share resources. So what we do is we try and facilitate exchanges between companies. We capture information. How we do this is we usually have workshops. At a workshop, we have about 50 companies, and each company comes there with resources that they have, resources that they want. They put up their hand, oh, I've got this, and the company says, oh, I want that. So it's more of a matchmaking exercise that we do. We also do site visits where you go site visit a company, you sit down with them, you identify the stuff that they have that is underutilized, and you try to find other companies that can make use of them. So all the stuff that we capture from these companies, we've got a database called Synergy, where we store all the stuff there. With the nice thing about this database that is quite secure, so all the company information is very secure there. And what it does is once you populate it with all the resources that you have, when you input a resource, it quickly matches the companies that have that type of resource and the companies that potentially use that resource. Yeah, so we also try and support and implement resource matches. We facilitate negotiations between companies and also provide technical expertise where needed. We also develop summary reports, and we also develop case studies for some of the synergies that would have been successful, just as a showcase to show to other companies that the stuff that we're doing is actually very practical. And how we measure impact, there are KPIs that I think I highlighted at the beginning, where we're looking at, we look at stuff like how much stuff have you diverted from landfill, how much jobs have you created, how much GHGs have you reduced, and economic benefits to the companies that are participating in the IS program. So in 2010, the first pilot industrial symbiosis program was piloted in Gauteng. It didn't really kick off. And the second one to come up was the Green Cape one. In 2013, the pilot was a success and it's been growing from strength to strength since then. As I speak right now, we have 3 very active industrial symbiosis programs in the country that are operational and functional. You have WISP in the Western Cape, you got KISP in KZN, and GISP, which is in Gauteng, which are both run by the NCPC. Okay, and then there are also other programs that have been launched, which are still in pilot phase. For example, there's the Mpumalanga ISP, and there's also the Limpopo ISP. These are still in pilot phase. So what we do, because our programs are funded either by the city or various government departments, the services that we provide to companies are free at point of delivery. That is, your taxpayers' money actually pays for that. So I think I've mentioned that, trying to build an industrial symbiosis network, facilitate that. Summary reports. I think I'll hand over to my colleague, Henry, to talk about some of the impacts of the IS work we're doing here in South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel, for that timeline, how far we have come and where we are. The slide right in front of you shows who runs the Western Cape Industrial Symbiosis, that is the Green Cape. They are funded by the City of Cape Town, and the program is delivered through Green Cape, and they work in collaboration with the Western Cape government and the NCPC, together with the international synergies based in the UK that we did start with when we started the program in 2010 and 2013 up to date. And for Gauteng Industrial Symbiosis Program, KZ Industrial Symbiosis Program, and Mpumalanga Industrial Symbiosis Program, together with the Limpopo Industrial Symbiosis Program, we work collaboratively with Gauteng, that's GDAD. Then we work collaboratively in Gauteng with the Innovation Hub. Then in Mpumalanga, we have Mpumalanga Province. And then in Limpopo, we have Limpopo provincial government, specifically their local economic development departments in those specific provinces. So that's how we work with our stakeholders, and they have been the key enablers in running these programs where impact has been realized. The case in point is Gauteng and KZN. Now, what Emmanuel talked about was how far we have gone. A program running in KZN, running in Western Cape, and in Gauteng. What have we been able to realize in terms of the impact of the program? The KPIs, as he mentioned, waste to landfill diversion. Up to 191,000 tons of waste diverted from landfill, leading to 208,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions that have been reduced, around about 107 tons of virgin resource use reduction that have been realized, that has led to almost 1 million cubic meters of industrial water that has been saved, and with a cost savings of 17 million rands. This is a summation of all the 3 active programs in the country. And we went further and looked at what does the landfill diversion figures mean in terms of landfill, that is landfill space that are quite scarce in the country. Close to 45 million rands of value in airspace saving that have been realized, and economically up to 27 million rands of resources contributed back to South African economy, and also 72 million rands of direct benefit to our South African economy. So the total economic benefit for all the 3 programs in the country go up to 164 million rands realized. These figures are defendable. What we did after realizing the tons of waste diverted from the landfill, we had to go out and look for an economist. We went into CSIR, we got a chief economist who we gave the figures, and he did these particular calculations. So as we speak, we know we are presenting credible and defendable figures. What have been the challenges since the program started, and what are the barriers? A couple of barriers in the technical aspects, if you see there. We have legislative barriers, though that is getting a little bit relaxed with the new waste management strategy, with more push from environmental affairs to have waste economy unlocked. We are getting there. Then logistical barriers, and this is where I think we can raise up our arm and make a call out there to can offer those kind of to unlock those particular logistical challenges, and this goes with capacity and finance. We have a couple of good solution providers, locally based, who can really look at a waste stream and try and get a business model, try and get something out of it. But the challenge they have is, how do I get the money out to kickstart my project? Who finances me? Where do I get the capacity? Where do I get the skill? And those are some of the barriers we encounter with little, small SMEs that we encounter with, who are quite technologically sensitive in terms of finding potential solutions to specific waste streams. What do we foresee as the future of industrial symbiosis? Embedding industrial symbiosis in industry, in all industry applications where waste is generated, whether it is at a bigger scale or at a lower scale, but embedding industrial symbiosis as an enabler to minimize waste generation and optimize resource utilization. Expanding industrial symbiosis activities in South Africa and beyond. We are now in 5 provinces. Would love to add on 1 or 2 and get to the 8th. We may not go to the 9, but also go beyond the 8 provinces and see how we can share our expertise across South Africa. Then analyzing the synergy data to identify enterprise development opportunities. As Emmanuel said, we have all the industries we interact with. They share with us the data that they have in terms of their waste generation. That data is stored on a synergy management system that is secure. If at any one particular moment an entrepreneur comes up and say, look, I'm looking for this particular waste stream. Where do I get it? I can go out and do something out of it. Can we be able to direct him where this waste is with the data that we keep? And this is what Dr. Olofse said, the challenges of data that we have in terms of waste in South Africa and even in Africa. We are trying to step in that space and see how much can we collect. How much can we share with? And how can this data be used out there? And then working with incubators. In Gauteng, we are working with the Innovation Hub, who are also our program funders. And in Cape Town, there is Sarebi, that is also working collaboratively with Green Cape to see how we can incubate, work with SMMEs, move them from where they are to the next step. Some key opportunities. As I conclude, we are looking for those particular waste streams. If you have any idea, I may read them the wrong way. Epox resins, we need tar, we need thermoplastics. If you know any of these ones out there or someone who has it, please get in touch with us and we see how we can try and with that, I would like to thank you. Thank you very much for your listening.